Blasphemy laws are weapons used to intimidate.
Blasphemy laws are not helpful.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm so glad you've joined us today, and thank you, Mark, for welcoming us to the program. I also would welcome you to today's program. We always look forward to gathering around this table, having great discussions. Today is going to be no exception, I'm sure, as you heard from the opening remarks. But before we get started, I'd like for you to meet the rest of the panelists. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right. They'll tell us who they are and a little bit about themselves.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I'm the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Jordan Offsire. I'm a rabbi living in retirement and active in the interests of the Jewish and the larger community.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a senior minister, the senior minister of First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. Our congregation is a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
I'm Andrea Luxon. I'm president of Andrews University in Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Washington.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God, and I serve at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, as senior professor of church history and ecumenics, and as a special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. Looking forward to this discussion. As you heard in the opening statements, we're talking about blasphemy today. It's a word we don't often hear in common parlance, but it is an issue, if it's not just in this country, but around the world, because recent news reports on the enforcement of so-called blasphemy laws raise concerns for those who practice a minority faith. One of the most recent cases involved Mr. Basuki Pumama, the former governor of Jakarta, Indonesia. A comment that he made during his political campaign led many to believe that he had blasphemed the Quran. Mr. Pumama denied the charge. As a result, thousands of Muslims were mobilized, putting pressure upon the judicial process and jeopardizing the impartiality of the judicial process in favor of certain religious interests. We'd like our panelists to consider the following questions today, and there are just three of them, but we probably go further than that on this one. The first question: are blasphemy laws a valuable contribution to a society, or are they problematic? Second question: in a country where blasphemy laws protect the interests of one religion, say Islam, should other religions also propose blasphemy laws in order to balance the scales? And the third question: should any country that claims to have religious freedom and freedom of religious expression guaranteed under its constitution, as Indonesia does, allow blasphemy laws to exist? That's our subject. Those are our questions I'd like for our panelists to consider today. Let's return now to those who made our opening comments. For that, we go back to Dr. Robeck. Welcome back to the program. And please, can you expand the thoughts that you opened the program with?
Well, I'll try to do that. There are two kinds of laws that are going into effect in a variety of countries these days that affect religious freedom. One of them is blasphemy laws, which is often found in Muslim context, and the other is non-conversion laws, which is found in other contexts in addition to being found in Muslim context. So I think that's really important to keep these two things in mind. I think blasphemy laws are probably brought about with good intentions. Nobody wants to see their God, or in this case the Quran, blasphemed by other people who have no right to do so, or at least people that they believe ought not to do so. I think I would like to remind all of us that, you know, the Ten Commandments carries a thing that's, one of the commandments is that we are not to take the name of the Lord our God in vain. Unfortunately, in our culture, that's all too common. I mean, I've seen or heard people use God's name as an adjective on just about anything, even and Jesus Christ, same kind of action. Every other word or every other phrase is with these kinds of words, and they're used as, in a sense, as swear words. They are blaspheming God. I think that's really important that we understand that we have allowed within the so-called Christian culture, that is the culture, at least in the United States, which was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, to have that kind of freedom and to look at that as though it were normal parlance, and that's fine. In the case of Indonesia, what this person did was basically say, I'm running for this office of governor. He's been the governor. I'm running it for it again. And somebody had raised the question, you can't be that if this is a Muslim state. And he basically said, well, I don't see any place in the Quran that says that a Christian couldn't be the head of the state. That was understood to be blasphemy. It blasphemed the Quran because the people that brought the charge were saying that the Quran did in fact teach that, and no outsider, no non-Muslim has the right to interpret the Quran. We had a similar kind of thing in Pakistan, where one family was opposed to another particular woman who was a Christian, and they asserted that this woman had blasphemed when there was no evidence that she had done so. And she was put on trial, and of course the potential for a death penalty in the blasphemy case was there. But it was used to settle personal disputes. So I think these kinds of things can be misused, but I think what they're trying to do is to say, we want you to take our religion seriously. I would say as a Christian, we want you to take our God seriously, and therefore to stop blaspheming whenever you have the opportunity to do so. We see it in the movies, we see it on the streets, we see it at places of work, not at Fuller, but in other places where people work. But I think it's far too common.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Robeck. Across the table, John Peterson. Kenneth Peterson, welcome to the program. You also made a comment to start the program. Please expand that thought.
Well, I first have to respond to Mel, as I'm certainly glad there's one island in the United States called Fuller that
Does not blaspheme.
does not blaspheme. So we are indeed blessed that we have this great gift.
I'm glad you recognize that.
Yes, I'm sure you do. One thing that needs to be said at the outset is that one size simply does not fit all.
Yeah.
And when one looks at countries that have the very strictest blasphemy laws, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, India, Malaysia, Tunisia, Egypt, and Nigeria, one cannot paint those countries all with the same brush. The situation in Jakarta today, and you've absolutely correctly identified the situation and the problem that a Christian had in seeking the presidency, governorship, excuse me, that, you defined it perfectly well, and, that the blasphemy laws are in such a way that indeed he could be tried for blasphemy in relationship to the Quran. And that, of course, raises enormous enormous problems. All the countries that we have been discussing today, of course, are Muslim countries, and some of them being the most extreme fundamentalistic countries. But we in the United States also, I would have to say, cannot forget our own history. Some of the history is quite contemporary, as you've just defined it, Mel. But our own history, and as well as Jim Crow laws. So we have our own deck of cards here that we have to have. Insults or perceived crimes against religions or religious symbols can indeed cause enormous great offense. But laws designed to curb such slurs only intensify the sense of grievances and put issues in the realm of the political, oftentimes with the most deadly consequences. Rather than providing a peaceful mechanism to resolve conflicts, I would argue blasphemy laws tend to inflame passions and encourage violence. And as I have said, in the way that the Jim Crow laws in the United States gave license to lynch mobbings. So therefore, I think we have a horrid situation, and blasphemy laws, I would argue, are simply not helpful.
All right, thank you. Let's hear from the other panelists now. Let's come to Rabbi Ofsire. Rabbi Ofsire, your position and thoughts on the subject, please.
My thoughts are that blasphemy, for one, may be something very positive for the other. Blasphemy is not an objective fact, but blasphemy is a way of describing certain kinds of actions. And the actions that are referenced here are actions that we would not want to see in our own country, even if we used a different word to define what indeed is meant.
All right, thank you very much. Bishop Olson, welcome to the program again today. And your perspective on the subject of blasphemy.
I think blasphemy is a great sin. It's overlooked frequently in our country, and even by Christians. It's something where we become casual to hearing it, and so we can be flippant in its use, just disregard. I think also, though, in our country, we, especially in our tradition of freedom of speech, this can run a great problem, and as far as making things helpful as Americans, I think we even see this crossover in what's called hate speech today. I think that while hate speech is inflammatory and destructive, it still incurs upon our fabric as a country, and it's hard to make a law that curbs our freedom of speech in a way that will, in a sense, cause more discord and more harm.
All right, thank you very much. Next to you is Reverend Plumley. Welcome to the program. Your thoughts on the subject?
Thank you. For those of us who are Christians, I think it's worth keeping in mind that one of the charges against Jesus was that he was a blasphemer. So we need to be very, very careful whenever we would think that we need to curb somebody else's behavior because we think that what they're doing is blasphemy. What the rabbi said a moment ago about blasphemy being a subjective thing and not a subjective judgment and not something that's objective is very true. And worse, blasphemy laws codify intolerance. They're part and parcel of religious establishment, the establishment of a religion, a favored sect out of all the world's religions.
Okay, thank you very much. Across the table from you is Dr. Luxton. Dr. Luxton, your thoughts and perspectives, please.
So I'd like to go back. Mel referenced the Ten Commandments. I'd like to go back to that too. You're like you've got a codification of God's law there, and that does include words against God or misuse of our relationship with God. That is part of it. And I suppose that we have to look at the difference between God's law and civil law, and where civil law and God's law connect. And some of the commandments we do. Do not steal, do not murder. That becomes part of the civil law too. I think when we move into some of the other areas, it does get very subjective and open to political interpretation and abuse. And I think that's where you've got the problem here. In looking on from the outside at least, you wonder in the Indonesian environment, were the people that made the claims, was it really about blasphemy or was it about a political agenda? And as soon as you move into that arena, you get problems. I think most countries have had similar laws. If I go back, UK background, plenty of laws, 16th and 17th century, that were very similar in this and what you could and couldn't say, and you could be arrested for it, etc. And there's some very interesting events surrounding that. But again, when you look at some of those, it seems like, was this politics that was going on, or was it really someone who blasphemed or said something they shouldn't do? Having said all of that, I think we need to be very careful to say, well, it doesn't matter what people say. Because I think then you do get into hate speech and other speeches. I think it does matter. But should it become something that's a civil law and something we react to there, then I think, no, there's just too many problems.
As Americans, one of our most cherished and privileged rights is freedom of speech. And blasphemy is largely something verbal, but there are activities that can be associated with blasphemy as well. And what does a society do, a society or a government, shall we say, do to prevent the abuse of even their own religious restraining laws, such as blasphemy, in a place like Indonesia? What can government agencies do to help prevent that? And I know that becomes a bit prickly, but any thoughts on that subject? Does it rise to the level of government intervention to quell the abuse or the overstatements or being used in a court of law, as you were suggesting a moment ago, Dr. Mel? You gave the example of someone using it in a court of law, accusing someone.
That's right.
Where does that go? How do you?
Well, let me back up and give you an illustration here in the United States. Remember, several years ago, there was this pastor in Florida who decided that he was going to publicly burn a Quran, okay? And there were all kinds of accusations against this. This is blasphemy against the Quran, it's blasphemy against Allah, and so forth. I would tend to agree with that. I mean, there's a sense in which that was a horrifying act as far as I'm concerned. Now, in a country where we have the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, it was valid, it was legal, but I don't think it was moral or ethical. And I think all it did was inflame the hatred and anger of those who saw the Quran as being a sacred book. So I think in the United States, perhaps, we take things too lightly rather than seriously enough, that one would think that would work better. There are other better ways to respond to Islam at this point in time.
That's right. The problem came when the government stuck its big nose in it.
Go ahead.
And the problem comes when the government sticks its nose in things. And the problem is these are laws.
Yeah.
We can argue all day about what's blasphemy, what's not,
Right.
what folks should do or not. But it's when things get codified in the law of the land that the punishments become too severe, and the religion is actually damaged.
All right, Bishop Olson, and then Dr. Luxton.
Just, Tom, I never heard you speak for less government before, but that's really remarkable. But anyway, I was thinking that precisely in a flip side in the United States, we think our obligations are only those delineated by law, and we have moral obligations outside of law. As people of belief, as people of faith, certainly as Catholics have obligations beyond the law, and so I think we need to expand our understanding of the need for respect in our society.
All right, thank you, Dr. Luxton.
You know, whenever you talk about freedom, there's no such thing as total freedom. There's freedom and responsibility. Freedom carries with it certain responsibilities. And I don't like it when someone says, well, I can say that because I have the freedom to say it, without any sense of responsibility. From a faith perspective, we can call it a moral responsibility. But even without that, there should be some level of, within a society, of saying, there's some boundaries here. Even if it's not illegal, even if there's freedom, there's got to be some kind of boundaries. And how we inculcate that in a society, I think, is a challenging question.
Thank you. Canon Peterson, and then Rabbi Ofsire.
Yes, I think that what you, going back to not your most previous statement, but a statement before, which is extremely important, is that what are you dealing here? Are you dealing with a religious, or are you dealing with a political? And I think that I don't see a wall that is frequently created between the two. I think that they're very mushy at times, particularly in the situations that we're speaking about today. But I suspect that it's basically done for political reasons, under the guise of religious.
All right, then, Rabbi Ofsire.
A very brief, pithy comment, if I may. Freedom without restraint is anarchy, and we really need to remember that. Freedom doesn't mean that we can go about doing everything that we choose to do. It means that our actions, when they are taken, reflect a concern for other people, not a diminishing of others.
I think most Americans would agree with that. Outside the country, though, is the challenge that we're talking about in Indonesia particularly.
Yes.
Well, I mean, yes, but
Yes.
we certainly have a good history, and I mean, we certainly have a history also of exactly blurring the lines between the political
Yes.
and the religious. And so I don't think that we stand clean in this situation, but we have our own history, i.e. Jim Crow laws and things like that.
But we have our own awareness of what should be, and that was the nature of my comment.
Yes, and hopefully there are, I mean, we can certainly quote people too from Pakistan or from Malaysia who also have that, but they're not in the majority today to be able to implement that.
And that is going to have to be the last statement and comment for this particular segment. But thank you so much for staying with us. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation so far. It's a great discussion. We'll probably continue it at another time as well. But for now, I'd like for you to stand by and listen for an important announcement, after which we come back for our summations.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the town hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you. I'm so glad you've joined us today. I hope you feel the same way and are anxious to come back for our next program. But until then, I will encourage you to go to the website. There you can learn more about the Town Hall Estates, which I think is a great place that you need to explore. And then look at some past archive programs as well. Now let's go to the summation statements by our panelists. Let's begin with Bishop Olson.
Most religious traditions have an understanding of the need to respect and honor and cherish the name of the Lord. Those traditions are supported by custom, supported by community commitment, but need not be codified in law, in civil law. We have an obligation to respect others, and our obligations as people of faith extend beyond those that are strictly delineated by law.
Thank you, Bishop Olson. Next to you, Reverend Plumley. Your summation.
Thank you. I think blasphemy laws provide a special place within a society where, far from what they are intended to do, the favored religious community fails and dies. They are not a faithful, free exercise of religion. I think one of the blessings of church-state separation, one of the blessings of not having an established religion, is that we stay away from these kinds of things because they kill religion.
Thank you. Canon Peterson, your summation.
Well, I wish that were true, but I think that even without an established religion, we are facing situations in which people are encouraging blasphemy laws. When President Obama was president, he condemned cartoons, books, and videos that had degraded another person's religion, i.e. what happened in Florida. However, we have to admit today that with the internet, there'll always be one more cartoon, one more book, one more explosive video. And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that type of a situation in a situation in which we are multi-religious?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Good question. Across the table is Dr. Robeck. Your summation, please.
Yes, as a historian, I look at the church, I look at religion for centuries, trying to get the bigger picture. And one of the things that has struck me as we've even been sitting here and talking is I wondered to what extent these blasphemy laws are challenges to the history of colonial imposition in all of these countries where these things have taken place. Where governments came in and demanded that there be space for this religion or that religion or this expression and so forth, and where people then pushed those others, indigenous people around in the name of God. I think that's a big factor. I also think that in the end, I believe this with all my heart, God needs no protection from us. God's quite capable of handling it on his own, and in the end, God gets the final word.
Interesting perspective. Thank you. Next to you is Dr. Luxton. Your summation, please.
I do think we should be concerned about blasphemy. I do think it's a problem. I do think it's a degrading, devaluing of God and faith. However, I don't think having it in the civil forum of law is the right place for it, because it's too much open to political abuse.
Thank you very much. And then Rabbi Ofsire, your summation.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest very, very briefly that the whole issue of blasphemy laws lead us to the distinction between freedom of speech and freedom from speech. Issue is of significant importance for a democratic society. Democratic societies are not without laws, are not without barriers, and we need to be open enough and sophisticated enough to understand and to appreciate that there will be freedom of speech when we are at sometimes protected from certain kinds of speech.
Thank you very much. This has been a very insightful discussion. I think the knowledge that is shared here, it's quite impressive to me, and I hope that the viewers appreciate this as well. If you're interested in more subjects like this, I'll invite you to come back to the next program, but we have archive programs that deal with some of the same kinds of things we talked about here today. And if you care to send us a note, which I hope you would, give us some suggestions about the kinds of things you'd like for this panel to consider and discuss. This is why the American Town Hall exists. We gather around this table, we discuss issues. They might not always agree as panelists, but I think great good comes from it in the end. It gets us to talking about things that we have in common, even things that we disagree about, but yet still remain as brothers and sisters and friends around this table. We hope it's a good example to be set for others as well. For now, the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over this very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.